What's up, everybody? This is Jordan with J Card Wrestling here, and we're gonna do. I'm gonna add on a new feature to my channel here. Recently, I've been diving into a lot of DVDs regarding to documentaries, certain shows, certain superstars, you name it. I've been watching the WWE Network religiously lately here. And I've been really diving into a lot of these documentaries on certain people. So I figured, well, if I watch these, I can come up and review them. Not that much sure if anyone would take my criticism into consideration for anything, but this is a wrestling channel, and I thought it would fit my channel very well. I know a lot of my other colleagues do stuff like this, reviews and all that. And I like to do the same thing too. Not to steal any ideas from anybody, but I guess put my 2 cents into a lot of these DVDs and what my thoughts were and how I felt about it, and if I recommend it to any of the wrestling fans at all. Before I dive into the review here, please subscribe to my channel and give a like for this video. I only have a couple subs at the moment here, but I'm very knowledgeable with wrestling. I plan to come up here more often, upload a video a couple times a week here, just to interact with people. I don't have a lot of people to talk wrestling with, so I come on YouTube to chat with other wrestling fans, just like everyone out there is. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. Please follow my Twitter. All the information is down in the link below here. So without further ado, let's dive into the DVD here. The first one I'm going to be doing for the channel is Paul Heyman's. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul Heyman DVD. It came out a couple years ago, I believe 2014. Where the DVD picks up was right after, I believe, WrestleMania 30, because they opened up the show with Brock Lesnar defeating The Undertaker at WrestleMania 30, which I'm still pretty upset about. But anyways, that's where it picked up at. So a lot of these DVDs, you have a general idea on when this was recorded based on the superstars that were in there. You had CM Punk, I think you had Ryback, you had a couple of people that aren't there anymore, doing this DVD for Paul Heyman. But anyways, just like any other DVD that WWE releases on any type of person, it starts off with shameless plug on them, self-boasting them, the whole 9 yards, which is how it should be, get you excited for the person they're going to be talking about and, doing the video on. Basically, it started off with, how glorified Paul Heyman is, and I have a lot of memories of Paul Heyman growing up. I'm 24 years old, but I remember Paul Heyman. As long as I've been a wrestling fan, he has been in the picture just about as damn as long as I'm watching wrestling. I only started watching wrestling in 2000. Just watched kind of like, towards the end of the Attitude Era. I watched the Attitude Era, but I really remember hearing him, commentate in 2001 with their invasion angle. I remember then he left for a little bit. It wasn't very long. They came back with Brock Lesnar. I remember when I was little, I used to hate the bastard. I'm not really sure why I did. But now I love the guy. But back then I used to hate him. But I have a lot of memories of Paul Heyman. I had a lot of fun watching this. I had a lot of fun, reliving the memories of Paul Heyman and everything that he has done. And it only occurred in 2014, but he's done a lot of things since 2014. This is January 14th, 2019, and he's done so much more since then. So I hope they kind of do a part 2 to this. They probably won't, but eventually they should do a longer video about Paul Heyman because he's done so much more since then. Moving right along here, the show starts off with Paul Heyman and where he grew up and his family and his parents. And I had no idea his mom was a Holocaust survivor. I think I should have known that. I think I might have known that, but didn't resemble to me. It didn't reside in my head. So that was surprised to me, which would explain the passion and thrive and just keep going and going and going that Paul Heyman has. He gets up from his mom. But I never knew that. I knew he was a Jewish boy from New York, but I didn't realize. I guess I just never put them two together. I should have known that. Maybe I did know that. But anyways, he grew up in New York. I can't remember where at in New York. I think it was Queens, somewhere there. I think he grew up in Queens. I could be wrong here, but he grew up in Queens, and he was always a huge fan of wrestling. And when he grew up, he was a photographer and wanted to take pictures of all these wrestlers. When he was a teen, I can't remember if he had his own magazine or he submitted photos to a magazine, but I remember he was taking pictures um, for Vince McMahon Sr. And I remember a couple of the people who were photographers there would say how they hated Paul Heyman being there because he'd always get in the way. He'd always be a burden, and he would always, be the one to step on your toes if needed. And that's exactly what Paul Heyman is. And I really thought that was kind of cool because, you never know where people start at. People always start from the bottom. And, I mean, that was probably the bottom. Now, I guess the way to work way up in the wrestling business, even then and now, is to step on a couple people's toes to get to the top. And that's exactly what he did. And moving along as he got older, probably around 19 years old, he somehow got into one of those clubs in New York City. It's no longer there, like Jesus, I know I'm gonna get made fun of for this. Studio 49 or something like that. I can't remember the goddamn name. I'm sorry, but he was at one of those. He was at like a club, I guess, where all these wrestlers were at. And one of the photographers at this club got fired because he was too drunk. And Paul Heyman took over, and then his name got out, and somehow he went down south to Jim Crockett Promotions, and then somehow then he went to went to AWA with Dusty Rhodes. And I like the part where he somehow, I don't want to say snuck in, but he was in creative meeting with AWA back then. And Dusty called him out on it, and he's like, "Kid, what are you doing here?" And he goes, "I'm learning from the best." It's typical Paul Heyman. He goes, "I'm learning from the best. I want to learn from you." And that shit would never fly these days if he was in there. And Dusty let him stay in there. Dusty's like, "Okay, come on in." That shit would never fly these days. But that's how Paul Heyman kind of got that creativeness to him, was through Dusty. Well, started at least. I mean, it inspired him to do that. Um, and then I didn't realize that he was such a photographer and like a newsletter writer for a while. I didn't really know that, which is really cool. And then he kind of developed into the manager role when he was down south, managing a whole bunch of, different wrestlers back then. I'm not really too not fond of, but I'm not really too familiar with all those wrestlers from the 80s because, I was only born in 94, so they're not my, forte here, if you will. But he was a manager for a while and then became Paulie Dangerously, when he became a manager, and which I never knew why they called him Paulie, for a while there, but now I guess I know. I never knew it was called Paulie Dangerously. So, as he kept moving on with the wrestling, he eventually found his way into WCW, and he was a manager there for a whole bunch of people, and he's only 22, 23 at the time, and he's already 23, 23. He's already making fucking headwaves, man. Somehow he went from a photographer to somehow become part of a creative team to somehow being a manager, all by the age of 23, 24. That's insane. That's fucking insane. The 80s were a simpler time, but in the 90s, but just that's just insane. And then somehow he got fired from WCW, and they never explained why. It was a hush clause. He can't say anything, and I don't know why. I really couldn't find anything online. I really don't know. I hope I find out one day. But he got a shit ton of money from WCW, I guess. It was so much money that he was able to start WCW. That has to be $1 million, maybe. It was a lot of fucking money, So, and I know I'm kind of skipping around here. I know I'm kind of chopping up pieces. I know I'm forgetting some stuff, but it is a review. I'm not diving too depth into it. It is just a review of the majority of it. I'm only picking out the parts I really liked, and the parts that are really important, I thought. So then we dive into the creation of WCW, and I always knew, I'm not really familiar with WCW too much because that was kind of before my time, before I started watching it. The only really, the only really familiar with that I'm with ECW, would be when they revived it in 2005 in WWE, and then they made the Brandship show in like 2007-ish. And even then, that wasn't a true WCW. But, I didn't realize how much of, I really hate to say this, but how much of a shithole ECW was. I knew that it was always low budget. I always knew it was, raw as you could get, no pun intended. But I really never knew how much of a shithole and how much, they were in trouble the whole time that ECW was around. I'm not too fond with ECW. That's just not really my forte. I do watch the hardcore wrestlings. I do like, people get busted open and people go through tables and all that shit. But I guess I was just never really interested in ECW. I watched a couple shows. I've seen a couple matches. Of course, I know all the wrestlers from there, but I just was never interested in ECW really, and I'm not really sure why. I don't know if it's a generational gap. I don't know if it's because before my time or whatever. But it was just one of those things where I just never got interested in it, and I'm not really sure why. But this documentary for Paul Heyman kind of made me a little more interested in it. Um, how it was based out of Philly, how it kind of became buzzing around with other wrestlers and other wrestling companies, and you get people like Tommy Dreamer, Sabu, Sandman, Rob Van Dam, the Dudley Boys, Stone Cold for a while here. You got all these famous people, probably all now probably Hall of Famers. Some of them are. So, um, and I didn't realize that Vince McMahon was a fan of ECW, supposedly. But I guess he was because they allowed superstars to swap in and out of each company sometimes. Paul Heyman would send over a couple people from ECW to WWF at the time, and then vice versa. Vince McMahon would send some stars to ECW for some stuff as well, which is really weird to think because how different those two companies were at the time. I mean, 95, 96. Holy shit, that was like night and day. Family-oriented show from WWF, and then this, X-rated show from ECW at, the opposite end. It was just weird to see that. But I never knew that there was a major controversy about Paul Heyman, I guess, receiving a check from from WWF. I had no idea about it. Apparently, it was a huge controversy. People were pissed that he was receiving checks from WWF. He was on their payroll, and Paul Heyman aired it out. Basically, it was a copyright thing with another wrestler. It was Scorpio, I believe, with his music. Had to pay the copyright fees, and Vince McMahon was covering it, and it's just kind of a mess, if you will. It was such a I had to really focus on how the hell that even worked out. But long story short, it was a explanation of, that he never received money at the time from WWE on a payroll basis. So I thought all that was pretty damn cool. Um, and then I realized how much of a nut job Paul Heyman was. They showed you clips of Paul Heyman, at 5 in the morning, wide awake, um, editing the fucking show for TV, and or he would be sleeping and he would still be editing it. Like it was Tommy Dreamer and I believe I can't remember, it was Tommy Dreamer or somebody else, and they were editing something, and Paul Heyman was sound asleep, and he was critiquing the editing in his sleep. I mean, holy shit, I mean, that's a pretty damn cool story. I mean, he loved ECW. He lived, he breathed it, he ate it. He obviously slept in it. I mean, it's just he was all about ECW. He was so passionate about it, and he wanted ECW to thrive as far as it could possibly humanly go. But the problem was that ECW was in. It sounded like ECW was always in the shitter from day one. It sounded like that it was always an issue. It was always a problem. They could never get any profit. It was always something wrong. Or Paul Heyman would send out, you know, It would send out checks that wouldn't go through, or he would send bad checks out. Money. He would always promise people money, and apparently he owed Tommy Dreamer like $50,000, $60,000, and he never got it or never saw it or got part of it. I don't know. So, it was just one of those things where, and Paul Heyman could tell you in the DVD that each day was a success because it was one day that ECW survived and kept going. And, I never really realized that how much of a struggle ECW was always in. Um, and then I guess they really never explained when ECW stopped being a thing. It just kind of jumped right into when Paul Heyman went into WWF at the time, in 2001. But basically, ECW ended, when they were out of money. Um, he couldn't pay anybody anymore. They're always in debt. They couldn't get a TV deal, and they couldn't pay enough for the TV deal. Couldn't pay enough for the pay-per-views and all of that. It was just a nightmare. It was a nightmare, and it's probably why Paul Heyman went bald. He was so stressed. He was already going bald, but it's probably why he went bald quicker. He was always stressed. He was always tired, and he was always wide awake at the wrong times. And he stopped showing up at ECW events. I guess Tommy Dreamer had to run a couple of those, and because he was just done, spent, burnt. He was finished with ECW. So I want to say he left in a shitty way, but I guess it ended in a shitty way. But I didn't really know how it ended. It just ended. They didn't really explain, like, it ended this day and this day. There really wasn't a time or set day that it ended. But in 2001, I guess when, WWF basically bought out ECW, it wasn't like a day. It just, it is what it was. ECW just kind of transitioned into WWF, if you will, with the invasion angle, which is another whole video I could do about. But anyways, people were really pissed off when Paul Heyman jumped to WWF as a commentator with JR for such a while there. People were pissed off because people thought he betrayed it and turned his back on ECW. But when I'm thinking about it and watching it, it's like I think he was done. He was just like, there's nothing more I can do. It's just like we're trying to revive a dead horse. It's already dead. So I guess people get pissed off about that. But it sounds like it was just time. It was just time for him to move on. So then I thought was really cool was that he already had a established relationship with Jim Ross in WCW. They'd always feel each other in the early 90s and, talk shit, I guess, with each other. And then 10 years later, they pick right back up where they left off, which I thought was kind of cool. Even though time has changed, their chemistry hasn't between them, But I thought it was really cool how they explained that the chemistry between those two. And Jim Ross would always say that he always genuinely pissed him off all the time, on what he did on purpose, and but made for great TV. We always kind of felt the heat between us two. And you can know it's real heat because Paul Heyman's an outsider from wrestling companies coming into WWF, and then I guess you could feel the tension between us two because it was real. It was real tension. So during the invasion angle, you just heard these two bitching at each other, which is really funny. And I remember it was actually some of the memories I had was when I first started watching wrestling was Paul Heyman, on the commentary. It wasn't for a long time. It wasn't the classic Jerry Lawler and Jim Ross. For me, when I started, it was Paul Heyman and Jim Ross for a while there on Raw. I didn't really watch SmackDown because I didn't get UPN at the time. But when I watched Raw, it was Jim Ross and Paul Heyman. For a while there. So I thought that was really cool. That's where kind of my story of my wrestling picked up on. So after ECW's finished, and after his commentary kind of run is over because he's kayfabe fired because then I guess the WCW and ECW lost that match at Survivor Series, the invasion angle, that shitty-ass invasion angle. He was kayfabe fired and he kind of left. And then somehow he got into Brock Lesnar, started talking to him, started training him. And Brock Lesnar at the time was this young 23-year-old kid, 22, maybe 23-year-old kid, who was just hungry for information. And the right person was Paul Heyman. So Paul Heyman became Brock Lesnar's manager in 2002. And then I guess Paul Heyman made his return with Brock Lesnar's debut in April 2002. And then Brock Lesnar had that massive run in 2002, beating everybody, beating Hulk Hogan, beating Taker, beating The Rock. He just destroyed House, and then became WWE champion in, five months since his debut. Holy Christ, And Paul Heyman was right behind all of that. Not to say that Paul Heyman, had anything to do with the storyline, but it was fitting. And Paul Heyman became a great manager, and with a great manager comes a great superstar in the world of professional wrestling. And then what they didn't tell you was that Survivor Series 2002, while Paul Heyman turned heel and betrayed him, he was already heel, but betrayed Brock Lesnar and sided with the Big Show, and he was Big Show's manager for a while, and then he kind of fell off the face of the earth for a little bit there. I can't really remember him being in WWE much in 2003. I mean, my memory's kind of shoddy when it comes to that. I mean, I was only 9 years old at the time, but I can't really remember being there until he became GM in 2003 or four. He wasn't there quite a while for 2003, I don't believe. But then this shows him how he became general manager of SmackDown around that time. And then I didn't realize he became head writer. And SmackDown 2002, 3, and 4 had such. It was such a different show because on Raw you had all these big tough guys who have a name for himself. On SmackDown, you had wrestlers like Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio. You had all these guys who never really should have saw live day in the main roster debut or main roster or any type of um, you know upper card push. And I realized it was all really thanks to Paul Heyman. He wrote them in there, and he was always a head writer. And I guess he'd always class Paul Heyman pissed people off, with what he wanted to write and what he wanted to do. But he was really behind all these characters. Edge too. I forgot to put Edge in there. I had no idea that he was a head writer back then. I mean, when you're 9 years old, you don't think that shit. But when I'm 24, almost 25, now I see why SmackDown was so good. And I'm pretty sure for a little bit there, I thought SmackDown was beating Raw in the ratings for a little bit there. And then you had Brock Lesnar on that show too for a while, which helps both of them out, I guess. So then after a while, Paul Heyman, after became head writer, I'm not sure if he got fired from that. I knew, and separate from this video, there was an interview with Paul Heyman, I think with Chris Jericho, about Paul Heyman eavesdropping on Raw's meeting, I guess, on a telephone call on accident. And I guess, I don't know if that got him fired or got him in trouble. I think it got him fired. But he isn't really mentioned in the DVD. There's some things in there that he left out, and probably to make him not look so shady, I guess. But, I mean, I think he got fired from that. But people thought he was fired. But he moved to the Ohio Wrestling. Jeez, I'm such a dumbass. I can't remember what the hell it was called at the moment here. But he went to the Ohio Territories, and people thought that it was demotion. And what people also thought was that it was good for Paul Heyman because he can pick out a star anywhere, like Brock Lesnar, like a CM Punk, like all those people. And so they thought if he went here instead of SmackDown, they could help all these new guys, become a big star. And I guess I didn't realize how much Paul Heyman, had such a, I guess, impression on all these new guys. He had so much information. He wasn't a wrestler, but he can somehow get these guys into where they need to be to the next level. I mean, it was insane. It was awesome. He was a student of the game, but he wasn't even a student. He didn't even wrestle. It's weird. It's really weird. But I never realized how much Paul Heyman did that, was escalate these stars to, stardom. And I guess after a while, he got pretty burned out of the wrestling. And he took probably like a 6-year hiatus, maybe 5-year hiatus. Until 2012 when he returned as Brock Lesnar's manager once again when Brock Lesnar returned to the company. And then it kind of left off there. He has his Heyman House on the side, his agency company. I guess he still does interviews and still writes, I guess, every once in a while. But for the most part, it lets off right at WrestleMania 30, right after probably this was recorded. So anyways, that was my ramble on this DVD. I know it was all over the place. I know it was really choppy. But, I mean, it was just a review. I'm not going to detail every single thing and talk about every single thing. But those are the things I just remember from the DVD. I did watch it 2 weeks ago, week and a half, so I'm noticing some shit in there. And I do apologize for that. But, this is part of my favorite DVDs to watch from WWE. This is my third time watching it within the last couple of years here, and it's always really cool to watch, and I'm really happy I did rewatch it. Paul Heyman is one of my favorite guys in the wrestling business and industry. Just in terms of, his power, his voice, his, charisma, the whole 9 yards. He's one of my favorite people ever. in the sport of professional wrestling. So I give this DVD an 8 out of 10. I mean, it was really, really good. I wish they would have gone a little more depth into how ECW ended. I mean, you know how it ended and why it ended, but like I want to know the transition from Paul Heyman from ECW to WWF at the time, and I also kind of want to know just a little more about all of that. I was just really confused about him transitioning out of the ECW into WWF. And I really want to know a little more during Invasion Angle if he had any say in that. I mean, he would have had to have, you think, but because that was such a shitty angle, I thought he would have more say into that. Maybe he did, and they just told him to shut up and, keep commentating. Maybe he just had to be told where his place was, and he was just a commentator. So maybe that was so fucking cranky on the mic because he couldn't say anything about the Invasion angle. So that's my review on this DVD, guys. I really, really enjoyed it. I recommend it to anybody. I give an 8 out of 10 here. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I kind of hope they do. I kind of hope they do like a part 2 within the next 10 to 15 years of this, because I think he's done more in the last 5-6 years. I mean, this led off 2014, 2019. Now I think he's done more in those 5 years, really. And you really can't add on to a DVD, so you have to do another one. So I kind of hope they do like a part 2 to this. Maybe the end of Paul Heyman's long life. They do a final documentary. It's a big one, and I like to see, where it picks up at, I guess, or how they continue from 2014 and on. And maybe then, how many years from now, I'll do a review on that as well. So that's gonna be it for me, guys. If you listen to this, thank you so much. Please subscribe to the channel. Give a like to this video here. I'm gonna do a couple more of these pretty soon here. I'm gonna do Triple H's Thy Kingdom Come. I think I'm gonna review the whole series of the Monday Night Wars. And watching it, I just thought it'd be something different, And then I'm also gonna do the 2014 Royal Rumble review because I was at that show and it was such a controversial show. So anyways, that's going to be it for me, guys. I appreciate you guys watching and listening to me. Subscribe for more if you like what you hear, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care.